Once again, thank you everybody for attending today's meeting. You know, Barry and his team have been on the road for a while, and I always find it interesting when they get back to Lincoln. This is the most well-attended event that they have. I think they've got maybe one more week's worth of events, but I just am so proud of how this has grown as an event, and congratulations and thank you to all of our Lincoln Chamber members being so engaged in policy. And certainly there's a lot of issues to talk about, so we're going to get right to it today. We're going to start off and thank our sponsor, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and ask Sherry Flowers from Blue Cross and Blue Shield to come up for a few sponsor comments. Please welcome Sherry Flowers.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sherry Flowers. I am Vice President of our Compliance and Ethics Department at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Nebraska, which now has our Government Affairs position in that area. We consider it a privilege and do appreciate the opportunity to sponsor this event along with our partners at the Nebraska and Lincoln Chamber of Commerce. So thank you very much. As you can imagine, it has been a monumental and full year for us in the healthcare industry. And it's been that same way for our state legislators as well. We look forward today to hear from our elected officials this morning on the economic competitiveness of the state and how businesses have been impacted by Nebraska's tax structure. We also will have plenty to learn and discuss with our local leaders and chamber members about Nebraska's economic future and what our lawmakers have ahead of them in this next session as they address that future. We hope you all find this morning very interesting and informative, and we encourage everyone to stay well informed of the issues that will impact us as Nebraskans. We want to wish our state lawmakers the very best in this upcoming session. We know there are a lot of issues that will be very important to us as Nebraskans and will impact us greatly. So we know that they have a full slate of vital issues that will impact all of us. And we just thank you very much for attending and giving us this opportunity to sponsor this great event. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those comments, Sherry, and thank you for Blue Cross and Blue Shield sponsorship and continued support of the Lincoln Chamber. I would like to recognize my boss, Wendy Birdsall, and ask everyone to recognize the efforts that she pursues in leading our chamber to new heights. You know, it's a great time to be in Lincoln. We like to talk about what a great community we have and being on the move. So please recognize Wendy Birdsall with me. Thank you, Wendy. Also, board members from the Lincoln Chamber and also State Chamber of Commerce. If you're a board member, I see Rich Herink, our board chair for this year here, and Kevin and Harvey. Please stand up and be recognized. We thank you for your leadership and all the support you provide on our board of directors. Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it. And next up, we've got Barry, and as I said earlier, Barry's been on the road, so he's a little bit road weary, but I think it's always a relief for him and his team to be back in Lincoln, kind of settle in, sleep in your own bed, and then come in and give us a nice review of some of the big issues that we've been dealing with over the last few years, and then kind of a look ahead as well. Big good news for Nebraska, of course, is that we're not dysfunctional like Washington, D.C. We've got some great leadership from the Lincoln delegation. We've got our senators here that are going to talk a little bit later. So without further ado, help me welcome Barry Kennedy.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for that very gracious introduction, and it is good to be home. As Bruce mentioned, we're in the process of doing 31 of these meetings out across the state, and not quite done, but we don't have any overnights left, so we're just out and back a few times, and I totally agree with what Bruce said about Nebraska. I tell you what, if you go to meetings around the country, which I did about 2-3 weeks ago, several of us went to a meeting. It's good to be from Nebraska. You want to go home to Nebraska. You don't want to go home to California or Illinois or some of those places whose fiscal house is not in very good order. And it's good to be here. So What we're going to do this morning, I'm going to go through, give you just a little bit of an update on a couple of things that happened in the last legislative session as it relates to business. Give you a little thought on what we see coming up in the next session, again on primarily business issues. I'm going to ask Jamie Carl then on our staff to come forward and show you a few comparatives on how Nebraska stacks up with some other states in a variety of areas. And then we're very fortunate to have several state senators with us. Bruce, I think, is going to introduce them. But we have several state senators with us, and we'll give them a chance to share some thoughts, and then we'll open it up to questions or comments. Now, that sounds like a lot, but I assure you we're going to move through it pretty rapidly, and we'll get you out of here in good order. I do have to do just a quick commercial on the state chamber, and I can't see the screen, so I hope we're kind of following along. Get one of these, by the way. There you go. Just a quick thought on the state chamber. We are a statewide organization, of course. Our membership is quite broad, both geographically and also industry sector-wise. Our primary focus, as many of you know, is in the areas of taxation as it affects business, of course, but also individuals, because right now what we hear from employers all across the state is we need more employees with certain skill sets. So that challenge of attracting people to our state to fill some of those jobs is extremely high right now. We focus a lot on the area of economic development, and then also labor relation issues, things like workers' compensation, unemployment compensation, the cost of doing business issues, those issues those instances that business pays the full brunt of. I think most would agree that we are typically at least one of the lead entities, and many times the lead entity on the business side of the table on those issues. Beyond that, because our membership is so broad, we do get pulled into a lot of other issues. In a state like Nebraska, obviously some agribusiness issues, education issues, environmental issues, pretty wide array of things from year to year. I always tell people, it's amazing. We call it Nebraska the good life, and then we find 650 things wrong with it every year. That's about how many bills get introduced on an annual basis. And typically about 250 or 300 of those we're involved in some way. The state chamber is governed by a board of directors of about 60 leading business people from across the state, and so we do have a few of those here this morning. Bill Harding is on our board of directors. Chad Denton just walked in, was on our board. People like John Cedarberg and Steve Ford was our chairman last year with PepsiCo here in Lincoln. So pretty good delegation of board members from Lincoln and the Lincoln area. We're the Nebraska affiliate of two different national organizations, that being the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and also National Association of Manufacturers. And so we devote a lot of time, focused a lot of our time on issues that affect manufacturing issues. But without question, our biggest and best ally are the local chambers of commerce, and Lincoln has one of the best. And I'm sure you all know that. Bruce already acknowledged Wendy. Wendy just does a fabulous job for you. I'm sure you know that. And we really depend on local chambers. Well, in the case of Lincoln, they're typically right there beside us in virtually everything that we do. And we certainly do appreciate that. They're very responsive, and when we need input of any kind, Wendy and Bruce and Jamie and the whole team really are just superb, and we really do appreciate that. I do want to introduce the rest of the state chamber staff that's here also. James Behringer is our Senior Vice President of Membership. Ron Sedlacek here is our General Counsel. Richard Byer is our Executive Vice President of Forging Nebraska's Future. And then Jamie Carl will be up here in just a few minutes as well. So just a quick update on what happened in the last session, again on business issues. And probably the main business issue that was passed this last year turned out to be LB 308. Now, it's up here twice, as you can see, because it was two different bills that ended up getting put together as one. But the original LB 308 dealt with elimination of the alternative minimum tax. That was passed in this bill. Nebraska was one of only about 8 states that still had an alternative minimum tax. And if you, either as an individual or a lot of small businesses who had to deal with this, it was very, very cumbersome, and we felt that we needed to get rid of that. Now, I would give you just a word of warning on that. If you do have to deal with, have had to deal with the alternative minimum tax, in the tax year 2013, you still will. But starting in 2014 and beyond, then you won't have to deal with that anymore. The other part of that bill dealt with loss carry forward. These were introduced as 2 separate bills, and then the Revenue Committee amended them together into one bill before they put it out on the floor. But the loss carry forward, Nebraska, a business in Nebraska was only able to carry a loss forward up to 5 years. Now businesses will be able to take that loss forward up to 20 years. This also complies or conforms with existing federal law, and much more easy to deal with. So LB 308 was a very important piece of legislation, and that did pass. LB 104 dealt with wind energy. Nebraska, and pretty much what this did is it allows wind energy projects to apply for and be eligible for some of the Nebraska Incentive Act, or some of the Nebraska incentives that we have under Nebraska Advantage Act. Hopefully give Nebraska a little better shot at some of the development of wind energy that we see going on all around us. If you've driven across Colorado or Iowa or Kansas anytime recently, you see a lot of wind energy projects in those states. Even South Dakota. South Dakota doesn't have an income tax, but they apply the sales tax to just about everything. They, earlier this year, repealed the sales tax on inputs to wind projects up there, even to attract more of that type of activity. We've had a couple of smaller announcements, one down in Gage County, Odell and Diller, one over around West Point, and still hopes of a couple of others, perhaps a pretty large one up in Dixon County that hopefully will be announced yet this year. But this should give us a little better opportunity at some of that type of new business activity. A couple other programs, and I'm just going to touch on these very briefly. They were primarily updates or enhancements to refining of a couple of programs. One, the Nebraska Internship program, and Jamie will have just a little data on that in a second, but a program that was passed, I think, in 2011 by the legislature, and incents businesses using interns. It's been quite successful so far. And then some updates to the Nebraska Advantage Act, also passed under LB 34. So a lot of times in a legislative session, what doesn't pass is maybe more important than what does pass. And that was certainly the case with LB 405 and 406. These bills were introduced at the request of the governor, and at first blush, they probably sounded pretty good. Eliminating income taxes, both individual and corporate. Now, what could possibly be wrong with that, especially if you're a Chamber of Commerce? Well, as in many cases, the devil's always in the details, and the details of this were pretty scary, especially for manufacturers and ag and a lot of other entities. This would have eliminated income tax, but it would have applied Nebraska's sales tax to a wide array of inputs and component parts in manufacturing. Would have rendered a lot of our manufacturers non-competitive with either businesses in other states or even within the same corporate structure with a plant in another state. It'd have been pretty hard to justify a growth plan here in Nebraska. Ag inputs would have been taxed. Things like hospital rooms and dormitory rooms and a pretty wide array of things that would have come under the sales tax. So it had a couple of marathon hearings. Hearings went till after midnight, I think both days, and virtually all of that testimony was in opposition to this proposal. And the bottom line, after the hearings, the governor did ask the Revenue Committee to kill these bills, which they did within just a few days. What came out of that, though, was what's called the Tax Modernization Committee, and that kind of leads into what we anticipate could come up in the next session. Tax Modernization Committee has been having their meetings, and both Senator Campbell and Senator Bowles are on that committee from here in Lincoln, as is the entire Revenue Committee and a few others. They started out with some just purely informational type hearings, and then went out across the state for public input hearings. They had hearings in Scottsbluff, North Platte, Norfolk, and then Omaha and Lincoln just last week. And of course, we testified at those as well. Looking ahead, as far as what will come out of that, I believe that committee is going to meet again on November 1st to start discussing what possible proposals they may come forward with, either as a committee, either possibly as the Revenue Committee when they settle back into just that committee, or even individual senators. There may be some proposals just come from individual senators that have been a part of that as well. I think it's still a little early to to tell exactly what that will be, but there will be further discussions and probably be some tax discussions. The other thing you have to keep in mind, looking ahead to 2014, it will be the short legislative session, 60-day session. Will start on January the 8th and scheduled to end mid-April. So there's just not going to be a lot of time for major pieces of legislation, and there's a lot of other things going on out there. As you can see, there's you got the whole health care law. There's a water resource committee of state senators that's out having hearings around the state. The education committee has had some hearings. There's some criminal justice type issues that are seem to be gaining a lot of attention here lately. So there's going to be a lot of other issues that the legislature will be needing to deal with in a short legislative session. So time will certainly be a challenge and a priority. The other thing you have to think, there's a lot of other dynamics involved. 17 senators are term limited. This will be their last session. That could play a role. About 10% of the legislature right now is running for governor. So, and I typically pause right here and see if any of the senators in the room want to make an announcement, if there's any others that may want to get into that. But, well, Colby says he might. So you got 4 state senators running for governor, another one that's running for state auditor right now. You have others that are trying to position themselves for future opportunities, either elected or appointed. The other dynamic you have amongst those that are being term limited, I think about 8 of them chair committees. So in the 2014 session, senators will start looking ahead to organization in 2015 and how they might try to gain a chairmanship or move into a leadership role within the legislature. So there's just a lot of different dynamics that will be involved in play, if you will, in 2014, and that'll all have an impact. What has to get done will get done. What they need to do, they'll get done. But there'll probably be a few extended floor speeches from a few of those candidates that are running and a few things like that. So that'll kind of determine or play out as the session goes on. With that, I'm going to ask Jamie Carl to step up and give you a few comparisons, and then we can get to the senators.
Well, this portion, and tell me if for some reason, Bruce, the slideshow doesn't advance. This portion of the presentation is what we affectionately call the measuring stick of our PowerPoint. And when we travel around the state, we show these rankings. Inevitably, someone will always come up and say, you know, those rankings, they're interesting, they're entertaining, but they don't always tell the entire story. And that's true. They don't tell the entire story, and we don't intend them to. But what we can't think of a better, fairer, or more accurate way to gauge Nebraska's ability to attract and retain businesses and residents with these than using these straightforward comparisons. And more importantly, these are the rankings that CEOs use, site selectors use when it comes to the decision on whether to relocate or expand operations. So we start with the broadest measurement we can find, and that's CNBC's Best States for Business study. This annual study first appeared in the 1990s, and this year, for the first time ever, Nebraska has cracked the top 5, coming in at number 4. CNBC looks at 51 different areas of economic competitiveness, with taxes representing just a small portion of the overall formula. Consider that in 2008, Nebraska was number 22 in this study. So in just 5 years, we've moved up 18 spots. What's fueling Nebraska's surge? Well, it comes down to our business friendliness, our current economy, the responsible state government we have, our cost of living, and quality of life. If there's anything keeping us out of maybe that elite 3, it would be our access to business capital, where we rank number 39, and our technology and innovation, where we're number 36. A very similar broad-based analysis is the Polina Top 10 States for Business study. This considers 32 factors. Here, Nebraska is ranked number 2, and this is, like the CNBC study, this is the highest scoring we've ever received. The study is conducted by Polina Corporate Real Estate, a leading site selector in Chicago. According to Polina, Nebraska's advantages are our low unemployment, our right to work guarantee, our unemployment insurance rate, our litigation environment, our transportation and infrastructure, and finally, our business incentives. Now, forget the 32 factors, forget the 51 factors, and let's look at just Nebraska's business climate. You'll see that it's certainly a tale of two states. The Tax Foundation's Business Climate Index, which was just updated last week, shows Nebraska at number 34, or 17th worst. We've dropped 3 spots from just a year ago. This study looks at 5 taxes impacting businesses: corporate tax, the individual tax, sales tax, unemployment insurance, and property tax. In those 5 categories, in only one of them, unemployment insurance, are we in the top 50%. Another study the State Chamber follows closely is the individual income tax, and in this category, Nebraska is again ranked well below average. We're number 35, or 16th worst, according to the Tax Foundation. Nebraska's high rate of 6.84% is certainly the highest in the region, and it kicks in at a threshold of $27,000 of income. While this ranking doesn't do much for our pro-business egos, it does highlight 2 options that state lawmakers will have in the coming session to make some improvements. They can lower the top rate and make that a more competitive level. They can also increase the threshold at which that top rate takes effect, and then index it for inflation. When we travel around the state, we like to show this map. It provides a good perspective on just how far Nebraska is, how much ground we have to cover to make some improvements in this category. If you look at the Nebraska-Iowa border and draw a line right down the middle of the country, Nebraska is one of only 6 western states in the worst 50% for individual income taxes. So that puts us in the company of states like California, Oregon, and Hawaii, none of which are pro-business or tax-friendly. Nebraska does have to be more competitive in the area of individual income taxes. We also look at the corporate tax. This is another key comparison for the State Chamber. Here, Nebraska is number 32, or 19th worst. Once again, Nebraska does fare worse than all of its neighbors, with the exception of Iowa. Nebraska's top corporate rate is 7.81%, and it kicks in at $100,000 of income. And just like the individual income tax, we have two options in this category to improve, and that would be to lower the top rate or increase the threshold. On the sales tax, we look at how Nebraska fares, and in this study, the Tax Foundation combined Nebraska's state income tax of 5.5% with the state's average local sales tax. Overall, our average state local sales tax is around 6.8%, and that puts us right in the middle of the country at number 25. Finally, we always like to end on a positive note, so we wrap up our rankings with the quality of life ranking as determined by CNBC. Nebraska has the fourth best quality of life according to the network, and that looks at factors such as crime rates, healthcare access, tourism, entertainment, and the environment. Over about a 16-year period, Nebraska's never finished outside of the top 10 in this category, and that's a strong selling point not only for businesses, but also young employees and workers around the country. While we're doing these fall forums, we always look at the Nebraska Advantage update. The State Chamber has been a strong supporter of the Nebraska Advantage program. And since it was implemented in 2006, the Nebraska Advantage has led to private sector commitments of nearly 27,000 new jobs and more than $10 billion of investment. But despite that success, and the fact that it's leveled the playing field and allowed us to compete despite our high tax environment, some have questioned the Nebraska Advantage's value. So keep in mind that the Nebraska Advantage is not a spending program. The state does not issue blank checks to qualified businesses, but instead businesses are allowed to keep more of their own money through earned credits and refunds if and only if they meet specified levels of job creation or investment. But do consider this: if the Nebraska Advantage program were a spending program, it would represent less than 1% of the overall state spending annually, 0.8% to be exact. And if the Advantage were a line item in the state budget, it would represent less than 2% of the annual spending by just one state agency, HHS. And that's before taking into consideration the new tax revenue that comes to Nebraska from additional private sector jobs and investment. So we think that provides some proper perspective as the legislature continues to gauge that program. Another program that Barry mentioned was the Nebraska Internship program. This received some tweaking in the past session. It was created in 2011 to help address the problem of brain drain in Nebraska by giving 2- and 4-year college students more opportunities to get valuable work experience in the state. In just those 2 years, the program's made some solid strides. About 360 projects have been approved with more than 300 different companies. Nearly 1,000 internships approved, and all at an average wage of $13 an hour. So the bottom line is, if you're an employer and you're interested in this program to help fund internship positions, use the contact information at the bottom of the page, and DED staff will be glad to help. With that, we wrap up our presentation with this portion of the program, and I think if we could retitle it, we would call it Who Gives and Who Gets. Because the Tax Modernization Committee has held its hearings around the state and they've garnered so much attention and statewide discussion, we wanted to present local chamber members with a factual, concise overview of state taxing and spending. So let's begin with who gives. According to the Council on State Taxation, a very respected and nonpartisan think tank based out of Washington, Nebraskans paid nearly $8.5 billion in state and local taxes last fiscal year. Of that amount, nearly half was paid by businesses. Here's the breakdown. Now keep in mind that Nebraska businesses paid $4 billion in state and local taxes last year. So almost 75% of that was due to 3 taxes: property, sales, and excise tax. If you look at the gray portion of this pie, you'll see why LB 405 and 406 caused such heartburn for the state chamber and Nebraska's business community. If you add $2.5 billion of sales tax burden to the state's business community, It's no wonder why some businesses would have simply moved on to greener pastures. Now, for the portion of who gets. Last fiscal year, state government spent nearly $7.5 billion. Keep in mind that that included money from the state's general fund as well as federal dollars. Of that $7.5 billion, 80% went to just 4 state entities. More than half of the 80% went to HHS, Health and Human Services, largely Medicaid. A quarter of that 80% went to K through 12 education for state aid, and that doesn't include your property tax dollars, which go directly to your schools. And the remainder of that 80% went to roads and the university system. Now, we're not saying this is good, and we're not saying this is bad. What we're trying to do here is simply show the reality of the budget situation in Nebraska. And we want to present the tough choices that face state lawmakers in the coming years. Finally, we wrap up the presentation with this slideshow, which shows a summary of state spending over the last dozen years. State spending has increased considerably, about 62% from fiscal year 2000 through fiscal year 2012. Now, again, this includes federal funding, state agency cash funds, revolving funds, and trust funds. But look at the red portion of this graph, and you'll see that that's the general fund, and that's the part the legislature focuses on when they're balancing the budget. This consists primarily of state income tax and state sales tax. General fund spending grew about 50% over those 12 years, but since 2008, when the recession hit, it's pretty much held steady. So kudos to state lawmakers as well as the governor for holding the line on state spending. Where most of the growth has occurred in the last 3 or 4 years is in the yellow portion of the chart, and that's federal funding. Federal dollars funneled to the state represent nearly 30% of the state's budgeted spending in fiscal year 2012. So we'll leave you with this. Given the fiscal crisis facing Washington, it's almost certain that the tidal wave of federal dollars can't be sustained. And it's certain that state lawmakers will be facing even tougher choices on taxing and spending in the years ahead. With that, I think I turn it back to Bruce.